Hey, welcome back. It's another episode of your favorite podcast, Animation Dissection, brought to you by Schadenfreude, a fragment of sociopathy that is just small enough to be socially acceptable for everyone to enjoy. I am your host, Neeksy, with the co-host, Zorak.
I'm also the feeling of that introspective feeling when you look back at things you enjoyed in your youth and you're like, oh, that wasn't as good as I thought.
Is that going to be kind of prophetic for today's subject, or just something you're feeling in general?
Yes.
All right, so today's episode is going to be about Fooly Cooly, otherwise known as FLCL. But before we do that, let's just go into a little bit of news, because there has been a bit of a big shakeup. DreamWorks, the animation studio behind Shrek, Madagascar, How to Train Your Dragon, Kung Fu Panda, and various other properties, has been bought by NBC Universal. So this is a pretty big deal in a lot of ways, because this is one of the main large animation studios out there being acquired by a very large corporate entity. And also just because the fact that DreamWorks had been financially in kind of dire straits recently. They had to let go quite a few of their feature employees, and they had also sold their very famous and well-designed campus in Glendale to another company, and then they leased it out to themselves, so they're paying rent on their own property. So they weren't doing so great for a while, but this... Well, we'll see what happens. Katzenberg, as a part of this deal, is no longer going to be serving as CEO, so we will also see what's going on with that, as well as the current agreements that they have had with Netflix. So, quite a bit going on with this.
5 Netflix exclusive Shreks.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, the Netflix exclusive stuff has mostly been kind of like televisual, so like more like a TV series that are being produced by DreamWorks for I guess I wouldn't call them a network, but again, we'll see. I have a friend who works at DreamWorks, and at least for their television, and he seemed pretty positive about the outcome. So we'll see. I mean, I'm hoping that whatever happens, that this money or this sale just means that they'll be able to continue hiring the artists they do at the quality of life that they have been giving them for a good while. DreamWorks was well known for actually being pretty good to its employees, so I'm hoping that will be a trend that kind of continues. So, in terms of other news, the Ratchet and Clank movie came out this week and has not been reviewed very kindly. It, as of this recording, it is at 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, to be fair, a Rotten Tomatoes score is trying to quantify something that might not be inherently quantifiable, but it is not necessarily a good sign.
No.
Now, I mean... here's the thing, is like I was not expecting it to be like good, but I was not really expecting it to be like received this poorly, I guess.
I mean, it's very easy to see how that film could turn out bad. I mean,
yeah.
In general, movie adaptations of video games, even ones that are done with essentially the same, style, because this is, very much you made a 3D CG movie based off of a
3D CG game,
game, it should be straightforward, you would think. But then again, those are two very different things, and the kinds of plots and things that can work for a video game do not necessarily translate into the world of cinema. Turns out interactive mediums are very different from non-interactive mediums. Who knew?
I mean, true. I mean, I think a lot of that was a possible miscalculation on their part in that regard, thinking that they could just really easily translate one to the other. But I think what was unique about Ratchet & Clank as a game series back when it was first coming out was that the way they treated it in terms of animation and writing was kind of novel for what it was at the time. But that was quite a long time ago. I mean, I think that kind of style of humor or that style of CG might just not really work, like almost over... I mean, it's well over a decade later. I mean, that series started off on the PS2, didn't it?
I believe so.
So, Yeah, I mean, it just might have been something they should have done much earlier if they were going to kind of capitalize on a currently running series. I mean, yes, they remade that first game for the purposes of this movie, but it wasn't really it wasn't such a big franchise series by now, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. I mean, they haven't had a recent game in that title that was really well reviewed for quite a few years. So, I don't know. But in terms of good films that we liked, the Zootopia Blu-ray is going to be released on June 7th. And apparently there's going to be a whole bunch of different versions of this Blu-ray release, like a Target exclusive one that has some special features that you only get in that version. I guess if you buy it digitally off of iTunes, you don't get certain special features. And there's the regular Blu. Why do they make this complicated? I guess it's exclusivity.
I guess. I mean, it's just anything to get people to buy it. And hey, with certain people, like, you could probably convince somebody to buy multiple copies then. So, fuck it.
Yeah. So either way, that'll be fun. I really like the movie, and I'm not really. I don't really watch a lot of Blu-ray stuff. I mean, almost everything is kind of digital for me these days. I mean, my desktop computer doesn't even have a DVD drive built in anymore. So it's one of those things that I'm like, I'm kind of glad. I guess I'm glad I have a PS4 because I can watch Blu-rays on that. Otherwise,
Sure.
it's kind of, and a lot of people don't have TVs necessarily anymore, being a part of a cord cutting generation and all that. I think DVD sales in general has kind of started to slip as people transition to just new methods and new ways in which they consume media primarily. So. Beyond that, I really can't think of any other major news events at the moment.
Likewise.
All right. So let's move on to our topic of the day then, which is Fooly Cooly. So let's do just a little bit of background on this. It came out originally in 2000. I think the original broadcast of it lasted through 2001. It was produced by the studio Gainax, which was well known, at least at the time, for having produced a pretty decent series around then, especially well known for Evangelion, I think was probably one of their biggest series. It was directed by Kazuya Tsurumaki, who primarily has worked under Hideaki Anno, the creator and director of Evangelion. He is currently working on, I think he's directing the Evangelion Rebuild movies at Studio Chara. I don't know how it's pronounced. This and Fooly Cooly was also written by Yoji Enokido, who has quite a long history under him. He did the script writing for Ouran High School Host Club, Utena, Sailor Moon, Razafon, Star Driver. I think. God, I mean, he is kind of a big pedigree, I think, under his belt. And I think one of the things that really stood out as well with this one was the music, which was done by a band called The Pillows. I don't know if they're still together, but
yeah, they're still producing stuff.
Wow,
believe.
That's pretty impressive.
One thing else to keep in mind is my understanding is that The Pillows was basically a sampling of like dozens of this band's like songs from their different albums. So it's kind of a weird, like they picked the best music that this band had produced.
Yeah. But it gave it a very, I think at the time especially, a very unique feel to it. I mean, a lot of the soundtracks to these types of shows was fairly generic in a lot of ways. I mean, they didn't seem to usually hire existing bands or use existing bands for like the primary soundtrack. I mean, they might have a pop song or two for like an opening or ending or maybe one sequence, but nothing like this or at least not in the way they integrated the music. So the series ran for 6 episodes and then was broadcast in the US on Adult Swim in 2003. So that was about 13 years ago. I very much remember when this first was being shown on Adult Swim, and it was this series that just came out of nowhere for me. I mean, there wasn't really anything that felt like a precursor to it. I mean, creatively and in terms of tone and the fact that it was 6 episodes long. And it very much it just bowled me over right away because I was just not expecting something in this style.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see how very basic rundown, I guess, of the overall plot. It's about a main character named Nauta who kind of is just living on autopilot in a town where he claims nothing much is happening, and he's fooling around with the supposed girlfriend of his brother who left to America to play baseball. And then suddenly, this woman on a Vespa comes out of nowhere, runs him over, then hits him with her guitar, and robots are starting to come through a portal that exists inside of his head into the real world. So it's kind of an unusual, I guess I would call it a high concept a series.
It's fairly surreal in certain respects.
I mean, surreal is definitely a good word for it. It embraces that kind of surrealism. I think maybe it's an avant-garde. I think there's a lot of deconstruction going on in there. It's very strange.
To a certain degree, it gets a little meta at times. There's the whole. There's several times where they do like a from the director's van of like the actors, quote unquote, in the show being like, oh, that was a hard one to do. What you did that reaction with your faces, like, you know.
That wasn't special effects. That was, we actually held the camera. Or the father, a lot of his dialogue is really specific references.
Yeah, and there's a lot of meta stuff to like, there's a lot of stuff about like, hey, we replaced this entire sequence with the manga.
Well, I mean, yeah. At the time, there wasn't actually a manga going on at the time, so
they ended up making a manga, but sure.
Well, it wasn't very, very good, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, I imagine the translation job they had. I mean, so the dub version that was broadcast, they had to change quite a bit of the references and a lot of the jokes, and I think they did a very good job. I mean, this was like again 2003, 2002 era where a lot of the dubbing was still, except for very certain projects, wasn't really all that great. I mean, it was well, we're just going to throw some voices on this and just move on was kind of the MO of the time period. So this one was a very lovingly dubbed series. I mean, the way they matched the tone and the acting style of the original very effectively. And I think the replacement of the references were pretty good. So like, they would reference in the US version Crystal Pepsi, as this obscure old drink that doesn't exist anymore rather than whatever they had referenced before. So like they found very good equivalents as well as for certain puns and various things like that. So I thought they did a pretty good job with that. I remember being
especially for the era.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being very particularly impressed at the time period. I think Haruko's actress was really good. The Japanese actress is still involved in quite a few things. She does a lot of the voices for various Trigger shows. I mean, she was a character voice on Kill la Kill. I think she's a character voice for Space Patrol Luluko. So she seems to be kind of a figure that has shown up in quite a few of their work. So, let's talk about the art style overall. I feel this one was really interesting, not just in terms of the visuals and the franticness and just the animation style, but I think something that really stood out to me was the color palette. So I guess the best way to describe it was that it's very pastel. They kind of used it was both colorful but muted at the same time.
Kind of it's like it has a lot of bright colors, but they've been desaturated to kind of bring it down to make it a little less sharp, I'd say.
Yeah, it was colorful without being loud in a lot of ways, and that was something that was really interesting. That I think for a lot of the digital coloring that was starting to get picked up. I mean, as we were transitioning from cell animation, I mean, cell painting had kind of started to pretty much die out around 1999, 2000, and a lot of the transition to digital resulted in very saturated like the default color wheel on Photoshop, essentially becoming the color palette for a lot of shows. Whereas this one was kind of a departure from that. I think it feels almost more modern in terms of like the anime now, where they're willing to have like sometimes do very muted color palettes versus before, at least from coming off of the 90s era where everything was this Technicolor nightmare. I mean, it was almost like kind of retro in a weird way. Like it's like they went back to the coloring style you saw from a lot of the 80s anime. Like they had that muted color palette of the cell paint, but being done digitally rather than going full on hyper-saturated, reds, greens, oranges, blues, and things like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And
I would say like one of the greatest benefits and the greatest assets of Fooly Cooly was the actual animation quality was exceedingly high.
Yes.
There were, though looking back at it now, while there are a lot of very, very, very good sequences in it with some really phenomenal animation, I'm also looking back at it is that there is also a lot of use of held shots.
Yes.
That only really stick up to me now in retrospect of like, oh, they really also spend a lot of time just holding in shots with nobody moving. And they kind of use that to take advantage of like, okay, we spent all the time on this other stuff, but the stuff to fill in the blanks, there is they're being conservative with it, let's say, to be favorable. Though there are certain places, like I was thinking back again to the first episode where there's some stuff where it's like, boy, they've been sitting on this very minimal animation at a long distance for a while now.
So they didn't, essentially as a way of avoiding having to animate certain dialogue pieces.
Sure, and it's more in the sense of like, oh, there's just like a lot of shots where it's kind of like, oh, they do a lot of environment shots that they just kind of sit on.
Yeah,
where that works, but at the same time, it sticks out more in hindsight now. Where it's kind of like there's a lot of high concept, good animation here, but there's also a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say it's not lazy, is not quite the right word, but conservative animation, I would say, in the sense that they try to make up the difference in the edges when they could.
Well, here's my argument in favor of doing that. Actually, is I think it has a nice contrasting effect. So I think having it being that kind of high animation style with just a lot visually going on at all times, it would get very exhausting. And I mean, I just remember again when I was very first exposed to this series, it was like one of the most hyper and frenetic things I remember having seen. I mean, up until that point, that was one of the most hyper things I've ever seen. So having these moments of stillness was kind of useful. And when you're thinking about it in terms of animation, you notice those types of things, these pauses or maybe these workarounds. But I feel that directorially, they function very well as kind of just cinematic shots in their own right. And so they're noticeable, but they don't distract. They don't detract from it, I guess.
See, to a certain degree, I can get it. Like, yeah, you have to have like the slow bits to slow it down. Like, I'm not saying this should have been all fast paced all the time. I'm more saying that there's a lot of slow pans over like still environment shots. Like in hindsight,
Gotcha.
There's like, yeah, there's some stuff here. It's just like, well, we need to fill in 10 seconds here. Slow pan over this bridge.
And then doing the dialogue off screen, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, it's me now to talk to you about how rough it's be as a kid over the shot of a bridge. Anyways, here's a shot of me standing underneath the bridge. Okay, we're going to get to the animation.
Okay, we're going to animate a shot here. We are having things happen right now.
We're going to hold a shot of me. Don't worry, folks. When we get to the action scenes later on, this will be all worth it.
Like that kind of, it's kind of like, it's a little hitchy in certain degrees.
Well, I also think that that's a particular stylistic thing you see in just anime in general, and I don't know if it's always a workaround or a cheap out, because sometimes that kind of aspect
totally a money thing.
Kind of, but I feel like those types of shots where you're getting a sense of the environment more than just the characters themselves is something you see in a lot of the manga. I mean, and you see in a lot of the better live action films that they used to make, like Ozu. You have these aspect to aspect transitions or these kind of indirect portrayals of the situation. if they're done
Sure,
well.
but at
I
the
mean, there's of
with
course
certainly some of these shots, though, it's kind of like it's clear.
Oh yeah,
like, okay,
yeah.
you can
Sometimes
see-
it's very clear.
you have the characters far enough away that you can't see their lips move when they're having a conversation. Oh, this is a lot cheaper, and it kind of goes into the classic, anime example of, okay, we're going to slow pan over this person as they talk. Okay, we can see their lips now. They're not going to move during any of this. Okay, next shot. We're going to slow pan down this person as they talk. Okay, now we're going to do a horizontal pan over the people not moving. This is actually just one frame of animation, but we have managed to stretch it out over basically 30 seconds now.
The infamous
Wow.
elevator scene from Evangelion.
Like stuff like that, sure. But like, I mean, it's not something you need to blame for. But in like hindsight, it's like kind of like feeling at the time was like, wow, this shit's crazy. And then looking back, it's like, there are certainly stuff that are pretty fucking crazy. Like there's sequences there that are nuts.
Yeah.
But as an overall work, it kind of evens out to a certain degree in hindsight. It's not even.
They saved their money and used it smartly, I think.
Sure.
One thing I kind of liked was that they let a lot of the animators and the artists keep their styles. So sometimes in the middle of an episode, the art style will just change and no one addresses it. So like there's that one where they're having the conversation in the living room and the animation style gets very oddly fluid, but kind of the characters become fairly shapeless. And they just brought in a guy just to animate that one sequence of them talking, and the models change, but it just made it really interesting and experimental in an odd way. So it was like this showcase of a lot of different artists, and you can kind of identify a few of them like just by looking at certain episodes. So like the episode Brittle Bullet was very clearly like the mental baby of Hiroyuki Imaishi, the one of the big animators at Gainax, and then later Trigger. You can definitely see a lot of his stylistic handiwork in there, or even the time where they did a parody of South Park animation style, which was that came out of nowhere. When that first happened, I was like, what the fuck?
I mean, that's been like to doing a bunch of different art styles and letting artists, kind of express themselves has always been, well, it used to be a mainstay of the Gainax style to a certain degree, as well as something that even Production IG and Bones ultimately ended up doing, a lot of, where, they encouraged artists, working on the project to, kind of make certain sequences and episodes their own, It led to the infamous situation where I think it was a Gainax, like I forget, it was like a producer or something on Gurren Lagann said that, like internet comments on like animation quality are like putting your face in an asshole and breathing deeply. And then they end up having to step down after that, after fucking 2chan or whatever got all
wind of that one. Yeah, I can't imagine that entire group of people being insulted by someone would cause a backlash.
So they basically, but they for a while there, that's always been like a thing. There's always that arts, the artists you always used to see in like in the 2000s that had that real gloopy style that I always forget that a lot of people hate that style. I wasn't a huge fan, to be honest, myself. But there's like these artists that are clearly like artists or animators that often show up in these shows. Like, yeah, we wanted you to do a sequence, so just do it.
Well, would you say that maybe an artist like Masaaki Yuasa would be kind of like one of those animators or artists types of figures?
Certainly.
Yeah,
I would say so. Yeah, though Yuasa was in studio at that point.
Oh yeah.
For some of these shows, like they have a tendency to for certain like these studios to just bring other animators in just to do an episode.
But usually they mask them a bit. So because like they have an entire position who is someone who just goes through the original animation they're handed, and they'll correct the faces, they'll change the model. In this case, what I'm saying is that they clearly just went, we're just going to keep the style. If the entire art style and the models change, we're just going to embrace that, which I thought was just. And again, in this case, versus maybe what the guy was complaining about with people saying like, oh, they're criticizing it. Well, that's in a show where you want that consistency, like certain like a dramatic series or certain types of a series that has a different tone than this. You need that kind of consistency, especially if you're doing very subtle animation as opposed to action animation. Like, a subtle animated series where you're having very slow movements, that's where you have the danger of things going off model and transforming and looking really fucked up. In a series like this, embracing the madness and the chaos of artistic styles and letting things kind of devolve or deconstruct or just vastly change style and tone, it worked. And it was this, in this case, it felt intentional rather than a byproduct of, oh, we don't have the time to check the Genga, the original animation.
Well, a lot of that also comes down to the fact, like with certain other animated works, like a slice of life works, shall we say? The whole point of it is a consistency of the characters, and they're trying to sell something. With Fooly Cooly, while there is a storyline and an underlying stuff going on there, it's more to fulfill the point of the animation and the goofy, like the presentation. Like
it's to serve the
there,
tone,
but
and
it's
theme?
not. Sure, like so little of it's like that important. Like nobody should be going and coming out of like Fooly Cooly going, oh yes, this was a profoundly well written and perfect work, because the themes of it are very on the nose. It's the imagery is what they're going for there. The story itself is not particularly great, when you look at it back. Like,
or the thesis of it is not that as profound as it might think it is.
It's like it's about maturing and going, kind of like the emotional puberty and stuff and becoming an adult. Huh? Wow, we've never seen that before. Oh, how are they doing that? Oh, he's got like a dick robot coming out of his head, huh?
And at inopportune times when he's emotionally conflicted and at the height of his hormonal,
Sure.
Yeah.
And then what it ultimately comes down to, like, fucking glowy flying around with cool guitars, because guitars are cool. Oh my gosh, he's got a Gibson EB0. What? It's kind of like,
it feels like they're kind of using a lot of the themes, or at least a little bit of the character from Evangelion. I mean, I think Naota is kind of like a less annoying version of Shinji.
He's a teen. That's all he is. Like the thing is, like, I don't think he's even like a Shinji thing. Like Shinji himself is basically 18. He's a relatively real representation of a 12-year-old. Naota is also just, hey, he's a 12-year-old. His personality isn't really there because it's all like kind of muted to a certain
degree. He's also pretty young, but I mean, there was kind of a bit of a personality going on in there. I think that he was, for most of the series, trying very hard to be or act a lot more mature than he really was.
Sure.
And I think that was a big part of it. I mean, when you look at his family background and the way his father behaves and the fact that his brother's gone, you have his emotional attachment to his brother, an inferiority complex going on with that. There is something there. I mean, yes, I mean, in terms of quirks, he's not as like fleshed out, but I think there is still stuff underneath that is going on that gives him some specificity.
It's more, yes,
but he's not a majorly compelling character. He's not a super dramatic.
That's what I'm saying. Like as a character goes, he is there very much more to serve their message point, and also to fit into these scenes, and also to kind of he's there to kind of fulfill
the episodes
to a most.
Well, the episodes that I mean, I think what you're saying
doesn't really go through a major arc.
I would disagree with that. I feel that he does kind of his major arc, I think, is his infatuation with Haruko, and kind of learning to kind of accept a certain aspect of his life that he can't control, and I mean, finding out that in the end, I think he ends up being betrayed by her ultimately. But but they don't necessarily do a great job of showing him changing after that moment. Like, so they'll have like the what the arc should have been completed, but they didn't really. There wasn't enough follow through to see what that change really meant to him. Once Haruko leaves.
Because the huge focus is like, oh, he goes from having a normal life that gets weird to goes back to having a normal life. And hey, he keeps living his normal life because that's what you do when you're alive. You keep living, and hey, you'll grow up eventually. That's kind of it.
Don't try to force it, I guess.
Yeah, it's like the only real arc they have there is like, oh yeah, I don't like sour drinks, and then he drinks a sour drink or whatever.
Yeah,
and they keep doing the picky about the drink stuff towards the end. It's like oh yeah, that's. Whatever, it's the actual development there is not wildly huge.
I mean, and also to be fair, this is a 6-episode series.
Sure.
So
At the same time, though, you can do a lot in 6 episodes, though.
true.
It's more that they focused on their high concept, animation stuff and their cool imagery over, anything actually really going on.
Well, it seems like a lot of that was left to the other characters. So, like, you get a little
Sure.
bit more going on with Mamimi and Ninamori. Haruko has some stuff going on, but I mean, again, she's not that deep of a character. I mean, she has ulterior motives going on, but otherwise she has very little depth to her, if that makes any sense. Like,
Yeah.
we really don't get any insights from her in any way. She's more like a symbol or a force of nature in the series more than she really is a concrete character in a lot of ways. I mean, I feel that Mamimi and Ninamori end up being a lot more interesting in comparison.
I mean, to a certain degree, when you look more closely at Fooly Cooly, it becomes more and more apparent that there's a certain element of it that is like kind of like, oh, this is an anime-ass anime in that it's a OVA starring a 12-year-old with like basically 3 different quote-unquote love interests in it.
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah, I mean, when you actually do think about it, I mean, and again, as you were saying, I feel like this was much more a showcase of tone and style than it necessarily was about anything too substantive, but it clearly seemed to want to have certain substance because there's a bit of a ponderous aspect to it. It tries to do a lot of this, philosophical talk that really doesn't go anywhere and kind of falls apart on a bit of scrutiny.
To a certain degree, I wondered how much of that is actually not supposed to, like, the talk is more to get the atmosphere than it is to actually have a point, I'm wondering. Or if it's just not really just well
Well,
done,
if
I
it's
don't
all
know.
atmosphere, then there is no point. So, I mean, I feel like it wanted to
Sure.
say some things, but it just it was kind of maybe too in love with what it was doing stylistically to really take itself seriously enough. I mean, I think as a comedy, it works really, really well. I mean, it's just that a lot of that character drama is, I guess I would say, undercooked. It's not really thought through enough. It's not really. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, it feels just kind of like beyond commenting or trying to create this feeling of ennui with the character of Naota, that it doesn't really. There's nothing too specific about his problems to make it distinct enough. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of specificity, but like a lot of that is just left up to nothing. I mean, there's. Yeah. I mean, they'll give him the inferiority complex with his brother, but what do they really do with that other than saying he has it?
Yeah, he doesn't like he really overcomes it. Like, never really, the whole thing in there is like, oh, he gets the power that Haruko wants, and then his whole thing is like, oh, he acts a little manly, and that's kind of like, and it's like, oh, well, no, that doesn't actually go anywhere.
It's like
really.
a baby steps kind of thing. Like he finally swings the bat, but then what does that really mean in the larger scheme of his life? Like what really changes for him? Because at the very end, we don't really see that change amounting to anything. He doesn't actually change that much.
The only thing that they have there is that he avoided really doing baseball because he felt like he wouldn't live up to his brother, and then he starts playing baseball, I guess, like afterwards. Like, oh, he decided to actually play baseball now.
Well, you don't really see him play baseball.
They say that in the last little bit there, like the last 2 minutes or whatever.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I might be misremembering. In either case, it wasn't so substantial that it really stuck out that much. So,
Well, again, the events don't seem to really stick with him that much.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel that of the characters that really change, it would be, I guess, Mamimi. I mean, because she just finally gets over
fucking bails.
She just bails. I mean, well, that's the thing, is that she was hanging on to something for a really long time, and that was dictating her life. And her major change is she goes, "Fuck it, I'm leaving." I realized he didn't. The older brother didn't really, love me like I wanted him to. This little kid, he's really just kind of using me as emotional Tupperware, as a thing to hold the. like to pass the time, essentially. He's not really that into her either. And she realized that, like, this is just unsustainable. I'm not getting what I want out of this. Fuck it. I'm leaving and becoming a photographer. So, like, that's something. I mean, that, she's the only one that really makes a big step and change and gets over whatever was keeping her there.
Yeah.
But that's
and
kind
so
of
much
it.
of the other. Yeah, there's so much of the other stuff is like kind of weighed by the fact that they're instead focused on the imagery stuff, and then also kind of like there's a lot of jokey sort of callbacks to Evangelion when you get down to, or Evangelion style stories. Like a lot of the other kids that he hangs out in school are basically like Evangelion stand-ins to a certain degree. Not necessarily the exact same, but they kind of fulfill certain roles, like the generic friends that like Shinji had. Ninamori is kind of
one's a perv, one's a straight face. I actually kind of like Ninamori.
Is kind of a bit of a. She's kind of like an Asuka stand-in, though, when you get down to it. Like, not exactly the same, but the same sort of.
She fulfills the similar role.
Sure, and then
she fills a similar role in terms of conflict.
But then you have Commander Amuro and all the organization stuff being kind of like that sort of stuff in Evangelion. Like, it's not exactly the same, but it is evocative.
Well, yeah, because the tone is way different.
Sure, and
I ended up liking
no sense be.
Sure. Well, I kind of like Ninamori a decent amount. I actually really liked that episode that is about her trying to fix her fucking family and failing, but and you see her change, because in a later episode she goes like, yeah, you know what, like, I failed, I cried, and then I just got over it. Mm-hmm. Like she ends up actually having something where she changes. She becomes much more self-assured, and I also like the fact that she's a character who gains a lot of her identity through deceiving others, which I thought was kind of a really interesting concept behind her. The fake glasses, then that also turned out to be a fake thing. That was kind of an interesting thing. I ended up liking her a lot more than I would like a character like Asuka, or I guess you would call it the tsundere character that usually shows up in these things. The emotionally stunted female character who, when challenged by her emotions, expresses everything through rage and attacks. Like she isn't like that.
But instead, she's more the stuck up, rich character basically that you also have in all these shows as well. The high achieving one that is obsessive.
Kind of.
There's always a lot. There's a lot of those that's an archetype that they go into. I'm not saying she's a bad character. You can match archetypes without being a bad character. Just saying that someone meets a lot of archetypes, it's not a criticism. Tropes exist for a reason. They are a fundamental thing. You can't. There are very few truly original characters in existence that don't align with some trope or another.
So it's the question is whether or not it's being effectively wielded, or if that trope is being invoked.
And I think she's a fine character in general.
Yeah,
she's a fine character in general. My criticism is more the fact that it feels to a certain degree, like in hindsight, that so much of what I thought was like truly like novel about this series. The more I've looked at it now in hindsight, it's like, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here that's more the sense of like, I hadn't seen a lot of anime that featured these sorts of tropes. And then now that I look back, it's like, oh, there's a lot of stuff in here that I thought was like kind of novel and interesting that is actually kind of samey when you look at it in the broader picture of Japanese animation. Like the actual casting itself is either very self-referential back to, Evangelion to a certain degree. Like, hell, fucking Naota's father is like a kaiji reference from, Evangelion, and to a small degree. There's a lot of weird, like, self-referential stuff that there's like, there's either that or there's a lot of some trope heavy stuff. And then like the whole like interaction he had between the different women, it does feel kind of anime in hindsight. Like it's like vaguely harem-esque in hindsight.
Kind of, but I kind of like the fact that he ends up with neither of them in certain ways.
Sure.
Like, because whereas a harem anime would treat this as like, in harem animes, they don't really have the downside to these relationships, or the idea that this character is kind of barking up the wrong tree, or that he is projecting what he wants onto these characters and then having those characters reject them. That doesn't normally happen in a lot of harem anime. Versus this one, it actually happens. Like
See, I
Mamiya
would say-
rejects
I
them,
would-
and then Haruko rejects them. Like a very few. Like again, and I'm also just curious about whether or not this kind of broader scope that you're talking about is because series that came after this, made use of these tropes very poorly and ended up doing it, or whether or not it was at its time period a novel thing because there just wasn't as much of that broad base of trope usage.
I don't think so to a certain degree, because I don't think Fully Cooley, looking back in hindsight, what comes before and after, I don't think it was that influential broadly to the animation industry. Like, there's not a lot of stuff that came out of this. Like, as you see, like, yes, I can see how this came from Fully Cooley. You can't trace a lot of stuff. Like, most stuff that came after it are sticking with being, generic anime, Gainax has always done its own thing to a certain degree, and it's been always hard for other studios to try to, catch that lightning, simply because the amount of staff and money they've been always able to leverage, and the amount of effort people are willing to put in to support stuff in that studio in its previous lifetime. That is, right now it's a very different thing, but
Yeah.
it was always more than any other studio was necessarily willing to do. Like, Gainax produced shows once every few years, and then they were pretty crazy often. And even the stuff that they did that was very different, in the sense of like stuff that is not quite as how you would
Unassuming
say,
or
not quite as like animation like heavy or crazy. Like, even stuff like Karekano ended up pretty novel in terms of the presentation style and what it was actually doing. And the Karekano was basically an adaptation of a manga where it was a romance manga where it's not a will they or won't they. It happens relatively early, and then it's all the stuff going wrong with relationship for teens. So it was kind of a slightly more grounded thing, though it had, as an incidental thing, it had a lot of dumb kind of like Japanese cultural stuff that, from a Western standpoint, is like that's goofy, blaming child for parent stuff. Yeah, but anyways, regardless, the whole thing is like, I don't see a lot of stuff that comes out of Fully Cooley that I see mimicked with stuff that follows.
Gotcha. Oh, well, I mean, I
Really.
just wanted to make sure that we kind of grounded the criticism of, like, are we talking about it, including the stuff that comes after and kind of using that as basis to then go back and criticize it, or, it's just a way I wanted to clear up the rubric, if that made sense.
Sure. And I mean, to a certain degree, when I say harem, I don't necessarily mean like an actual like harem anime that is built entirely around that gimmick. I'm talking about the sense of, I'm talking about the thing that Gainax was always very good about doing, and that is kind of picking their slightly nerdy audience and figuring out how to focus their narratives and casting to address that. Evangelion is not, strictly speaking, a harem series. It doesn't have elements of that, strictly speaking, in the sense of like, oh, will he or won't he with his characters. The relationships there are very unhealthy, in terms of personal relationships. That does not matter one fucking bit in terms of merchandising and in terms of audience appeal, because the audience does not actually care about that kind of stuff, really. Like, the fact that Shinji was surrounded by, you had these, all the weird stuff. I'm not even going to go into it because it's a completely separate argument, of like, you have he's living with this older character, the older character. You have the
oh God, it really does. I'm definitely seeing it now. I think maybe
they
what
kind of
confused
scramble
me,
some of the archetypes a little bit, but there's little elements of like, it's kind of like, oh yeah, Shinji was surrounded by 3 female characters that he wasn't really like hot and heavy, or they were even interested in him that much, but like, that doesn't matter. It's all
they evoked
ambiguity.
the idea of
It's
it.
ambiguity for the audience to do self-insertion standpoint. And to a certain degree with Naota, I wonder, to a certain degree, in hindsight, I look at it, it's like, oh yeah, there's like some kind of like, it's not heavy, but there's like kind of like a thing of like, oh, he's a young guy who's got all these women kind of surrounding him, and like some of them are kind of messing with him a little bit, like kind of like picking on him, and teasing him. Does it matter that it's only teasing and that there's no actual, connection there? Not really.
Well, at least
from
in
the standpoint of the audience. In terms of the standpoint of what they're actually doing from merch, there's just certain things in here that kind of feel more transparent in hindsight. You can see the kind of the chords, the stuff that Gainax got really good at doing for merchandising. It's
So you're thinking outside of the story itself and thinking about how the intent of the series in terms of as a capitalist product, essentially.
No, not necessarily. I just think more in the sense of like, I can see again, tropes are not inherently bad. Doing character archetypes and doing things like that, and even having this sort of thing like that it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm not necessarily saying like this is something they shouldn't have done. It is what it is. I'm just saying the more the sense of like seeing shows coming from Gainax that have these very similar things in them. Kind of in hindsight now that I have a broader understanding, because I had not seen Evangelion by the time I saw Fooly Cooly.
Oh, wow.
I had not seen
Okay.
seen a lot of works that would like this be considered seinen technically. A lot of the works that I'd seen were technically shonen audience. In terms of marketing,
Like the Dragon Ball Z's of the world, just
sure. Or like I watched a lot
specificity.
of Gundam at this time. Like Adult Swim aired a lot of shit that was actually intended for mostly more for kids than anything. And it was a very different type of show. It wasn't action packed. It wasn't a Cowboy Bebop in the terms of what they were actually doing with the tone and stuff. But at the same time, it's not quite as skeezy as it could have been. I'm not saying it was skeezy even necessarily. But
well, I get what you mean.
But it has things that are evocative of, okay, we've got our audience. What are our audience? Oh, yeah, they're like 18-year-olds. It's our demographics here. Yeah, I sympathize with them because I'm kind of a perv too, me director. It says, I'm just imagining Imayushi is in the corner just like nodding, basically. He's kind of like, make it pervy. It's kind of like,
well, like they're invoking the tropes of the harem, but without committing to the genre of what a harem
I don't think they're necessarily being high-minded about it. Like
no, I'm not saying this is intentional.
To invoke it. Yeah.
Well, no, what I'm saying is like I'm not saying this is a conscious process. What I'm saying is that the series itself it has those elements and those hints of what you're saying stylistically happen in harem things, but the series doesn't really follow through with the normal universe or the genre that you'd see with more harem things. Which the point I was getting at is in normal harem anime genre-wise, don't have what this series does, with those relationships. But this series still has a lot of those elements that you would have seen in a harem anime.
See, the thing is that all anime kind of after the 90s starts having elements of that sort of thing, regardless of the material, regardless of the narrative. It's the same reason why shonen series will have the main character surrounded by like a half a dozen women, and even if there is a main love interest, or even if there's no romance whatsoever, it does not matter, because the whole big thing out about anime is that they create these works to appeal to an audience that is supposed to reflect the creators to a certain degree, in a sense like slightly mature interest. It's the whole tendency you see of like, anytime anybody watches an anime these days or anything that comes out, people immediately try to make, porn out of it, basically. It's the obsessive, like everything is max horny mode, basically, to a certain degree. Everything is boner central. And I'm not saying that necessarily Fooly Cooly was going heavy on that, but there's stuff in here that they now look back in hindsight and like, this feels anime as fuck. There's stuff in here that's like, these are anime tropes. When at the time, I was like, wow, these are real novel. And you just start seeing more anime and you start just kind of drenching yourself in it. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's kind of all like this to a certain degree. It kind of all of them do this to, not necessarily in terms of the animation style and the high-mindedness, but in terms of like the general like casting to a certain degree. While the characters themselves aren't necessarily, because Haruko is it's hard to even characterize her as having a character. She's kind of interesting in the sense that she's
insane.
Kind of
that's kind of
she's insane, and she's kind of like a bad guy to a certain degree, kind of. But she's not really. She doesn't have a whole lot going on to her because she is a kind of a trickster, spontaneous character.
Well, she acts more like as a symbol than a character.
Sure,
she is the object of I think Naota's projections of what he thinks he wants, and that's really as far as she really exists in the show is as a symbol of that.
Yeah,
that's really it. Other than that, you don't really get much going underneath of her. Other than she wants to catch Adamesk or whatever, and even then they make that super vague, and that's kind of it. So yeah, I mean, again, like I think your argument is entirely valid. I was just trying to kind of find a way of defining it, I guess, in a certain way. Like, because I think yes, I mean I do see what you're talking about in terms of like the harm elements and things like that. But I at the same time I feel like it does that, but it also doesn't at the same time. It kind of is able to simultaneously exist within that framework, but with enough to make it not be as easily identified as that, if that makes any sense.
Sure, but I was more. When I'm saying that, I'm not actually saying like it's actually like harem stuff. I'm saying like all anime,
Has that element.
All anime starts having those elements to a certain degree, and they feel after a while it becomes like, yeah, you've got to have like multiple girls around the main character, and they have to fulfill these kind of different character archetypes, and even if you don't go anywhere, you got to have them because some of the audience is really into it, and different audience members might attach to different characters, and and if they tease them, that's all the better, even if it doesn't go anywhere. Like it doesn't matter that it's not even a major trope or even a major thing. All it matters is that it's there and it's invocative. And then like the thing I joked about, Imaishi nodding in the corner.
Well, yeah,
that is very much Imaishi's style in particular. That's something that's very much his thing, is that he is very much about being mildly to extremely pervy.
Oh God. Yeah,
he can go extremely, but he can also dial it back to the mild, and that kind of there is a feeling amongst you occasionally get the amongst directors coming out of anime where a sense of like, yeah, I'm just drawing what I like to draw, and I like to draw babes. Like the whole thing that came out of I think about this as that comment that came out of like the animation studio doing in betweening for Korra.
Wit Studio, I think.
The comment that was they packed them was like, yeah, we could do this. We'd be happier if we could draw a Korra with like a bigger chest. Our animators would like that more. And it's kind of like, oh, right. This is the kind of atmosphere and the kind of culture that seems to appear in certain animation studios. It's like, yeah, we like it better if we could draw like this. And you see this stuff come out of like manga on occasion too, where it's kind of like, like, yeah, we're doing this nerd culture stuff and pervy culture stuff. And you got to have a pervert character as a weirdo that wants a jacket on everything, because that's part of, the nerd pop culture to a certain degree. And doing these tropes in general is not necessarily a bad thing. Though I would say to a certain degree, they're overdone, but you see it enough, and it kind of sticks out. And looking back, all I'm saying is that looking back at Fully Cooley, I see a lot of stuff that it just on both directions, before and after, is kind of sticks out of like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that just feels kind of anime.
Gotcha.
It doesn't transcend it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a valid critique, and I see a lot of it. I think a lot of that comes down to this feeling that it's a paint by numbers series composition, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they don't. They do some interesting stuff on the show, but not a lot actually happens with the actual plot.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big thing. I mean, again, I think we brought this critique up earlier, but it feels like this is a show of style over substance in a lot of ways. It was very much in love with presenting a vision of things rather than really having a coherent thesis.
Sure. And though as far as style goes, there's some really, really good sequences. Like the example you mentioned was Brittle Bullet. That end of that episode was fucking cool as shit in general. Like the animation,
it's beautifully done.
The animation of that giant like gunslinger robot. Like that robot.
Oh, it's one of the best sequences,
and that entire sequence is just very good. The callbacks in that sequence to what is it? The Daikon 4 like opening animation with riding on the guitars and stuff are kind of funny. Like as you're dressed as she's dressed as a Playboy bunny. Like there's a lot of stuff like like I said, like just like nerdy jokes, references. The love of guitars is here, like the invocation of like rock music and classic rock music and just certain sort of style stuff, like the talking about different specific Vespa models and stuff like that. There's like just weird like kind of like cultural invocations of like here's things that these, the people making this liked, and they're invoking of a certain, style and era.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a thing. I mean, as you're saying, they bring all this knowledge and this specificity up, but to what purpose? And it ends up not really serving much of a purpose other than, well, here's some interesting specific minutia we've stuck in there. Like I think a lot of the dad's dialogue. I mean, he even does like there's a whole like aside he does kind of making fun of the Gundam director Tomino. He even coins this term Tomino-esque. Where it was like, oh, well, we're making this really realistic robot thing, and then when someone criticizes like the realism of this ball and chain robot arm thing, he goes like, well, it is just a sci-fi thing after all. We don't have to worry about realism. Like that was a weird specific reference they throw in there, but like, what was the point of making that reference in the scheme of what it was trying to do? Like, what was it?
There's funny Gundam jokes for some reason in there. It's like in hindsight, like they made like several women across different episodes and at weird times.
Yeah, I mean, but to what end? I mean, again, it's funny, it's kind of interesting, but why is it there? I mean, it's just because
it's because the whole thing is like a lot of it's just like it is intended for an audience, and that audience is enfranchised anime watching, presumably. These were OVAs; they went direct to video. In order to sell things direct to video, this is where the definite corporate thing comes in, the marketing capitalist standpoint of like, they had to get people to buy these things. They weren't on television. It wasn't like somebody was necessarily catching it on TV. Like, yeah, I'm going to see that. They were things that they were expecting someone to buy on, I presume, VHS when it first came out. I don't know if that was actually the case or not, but I presume. Or maybe was it DVD originally? Well, it was DVD originally.
No, 2000 still had video cassettes.
Sure, but apparently looking it up, it was actually
a DVD. But for them, it was DVD. We were still doing VHS for a while.
They did, yes. So they did it like as I expected. They did a DVD release per episode. So they did one DVD at a time, and then they end up selling a collection box. And I'd be very interested to see the pricing of it, given the fact that this was also during the dark ages of anime pricing.
God, I can imagine
everything was fucking expensive in Japan and over here, for that matter. Where, I would not be surprised if they were charging like $30, $40, $50 per episode. Yeah, that was the price of how they did it. And how did they get, how do they make these stuff appeal to their audiences? They try to hit as much as they can do. They could go for the enfranchised audience because those tend to be a bit older. They tend to be a bit freer and more willing to spend money on, this sort of stuff.
Well, they're an active consumer.
They're an active consumer, and they're also willing to spend the money on, anime, and a lot of money. It comes back to the thing that we've touched on many times now of the old anime model of we know we have a narrow audience that will definitely buy this. If we make it like this, we will price it to that exact audience and then nothing else.
Yeah. So it ends up becoming this strangely incestuous industry because then you have the people who are brought up within that. And that's how they assume that, this is the way the medium is, because that's all I've ever been exposed to of that medium. So your assumptions end up getting set by what you're being presented. And then those people, when they become creators themselves, well, what type of stuff are they going to create? They're going to create the thing that they've been shown all their lives.
Yeah, and to a certain degree, you can kind of see that in how many like in-jokes and, and how this is kind of like, it is high concept in like how it appeal, like the animation, and also like even in the jokes and stuff, it tends to be like it's there to kind of more play to its audience than it is to actually tell a good story.
Yeah.
And it certainly plays very well, and there's certainly a lot of stuff going in there. But yeah, in hindsight, I'm watching it again. I was not nearly as Fully Cooley blew my mind basically when I was a teen. Maybe that's a little far. I liked Fully Cooley a lot as a teen, personally. But in hindsight,
I think it was the same for a lot of people.
It didn't quite blow my mind, but I liked it a lot. And though in hindsight, it's kind of like, was it? It does not nearly have as much impact now as it did back then, watching it again. It's still got a lot of some really good animation in it, but the actual stuff going on past that, it's kind of like, it's anime.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely still holds, at least on the superficial level, it still holds a certain level of appeal, and there's like impressive technical things going on with it. I mean, I got one of the books with the original animation frames and the timing sheets and things like that, which, that's where my interest is still maintained in that regard. But yes, I mean, and when it comes to theme, characters, and story, that doesn't necessarily really hold up, and it doesn't. It's not as novel as it might think it's being in a lot of ways, and I think let's move on to the kind of the bête noire hanging in the background of what's going on here, that they are now going to be making not just one but two new seasons of it.
Which is completely fucking pointless, because it is so self-contained. Even with the spurious little bit of narrative it has, the arc and what little point that they were making, it's been made. It was about going and maturing. He matured a little. Getting us more stuff is not going to add anything to this, because guess what? We're not missing jack shit about an overarching narrative that we have to revisit. We don't have to, what's going on between Haruko and Medical Mechanica.
Or Atomisk or whatever the fuck. Even then, it was like, well, she just left to go off to the universe somewhere. Like, that's it. Like, that's just how it ended. She doesn't need to come back for any grander purpose or anything. And even then, because she's such a shallow character, there is no grand purpose to what she's really doing.
Yeah, and like the stuff that they had there loosely about there's this organization that's like from like outer space, kind of like wanted to do something with this magical, super powerful space pirate. Like, and it's like it's their actual
or the smoothing out the creases of the brain or whatever. And
it's like such high-minded, like kind of like vague, like it doesn't actually have a real meaning or real importance.
Well, they're trying to use a whole bunch of symbolism and these weird abstract concepts, but on a very, high school English 101 kind of way.
It was more about feel than it was about the actual content, which was why revisiting it is weird. Not to mention the fact that the revisiting ones are, while a lot of the staff is coming back, it's kind of funny that this is being done by Production IG when they were like the smaller player.
Yeah, I mean, they did do some of the animation. Like, if you look in the book, some sequences of some of the major sequences were animated by a couple Production IG people, but they weren't the major, they weren't the major influence on it. They weren't like the heavy duty studio behind it.
Certainly, and when the major driver of the feel and what made it, so important was definitely, the Gainax staff and that kind of Gainax style of like, we're gonna do something fucking crazy here. Here it is.
Well, and as you said, as you said earlier, you said catching lightning in a bottle. Yeah. That's essentially what they're attempting to do here, and the whole point of that phrase is to talk about how pointless the act of doing that is. So they released the synopsis for the upcoming season, and the idea is that it takes place, many years after the original one, and then suddenly. There's a girl who's basically like a female version of Naota who's like, oh, nothing amazing happens from my life. And then Haruka comes and everything all gets fucked up again.
See, it's a girl now.
Like, that's it.
They got a greater emphasis on the fact that you can have female interactions and still have the same sort of audience reaction because, they don't actually care about the,
Well, they'll just project themselves in it anyway. So Why do we need to spend the time designing a male character? Now there's another female character.
There's a fourth female character now because the main character's a female character. And you can think about lesbians. It's like, great.
Imagine the body pillows we can sell.
Oh, God, we can fucking bring out the merch train, guys.
Hidomi's gonna be the new Rei Ayanami, we swear. We're gonna do it this time, guys.
Fuck.
Is it Gainax that still owns the Rei Ayanami shit, or is that...
I think it's both. It's Gainax. Well, Gainax doesn't even do anything except for get merchandise out of it now. It's why they let the other studio make more of the stuff. It's just because they can be like, yep, we'll just keep making our merch. Get ours.
Yeah. I was just kind of curious about how the rights of that work. Because, God damn it, Rei Ayanami, why is that still a thing? Why did she become a thing in the first place? It's a mystery. Either way. Yeah. So, overall, I mean, I would suggest checking out Fooly Cooly just because I think it is kind of become a cultural icon in it, despite the fact that there's certain things about it that are, in the end, not as unique to it as people might think. I think visually has some really inventive stuff that's worth checking out in a lot of ways. Just don't don't expect it to have a lot of revelations about life, love, in the universe, or really a lot of satisfying character arcs going on. At least in our opinions, it doesn't really have as much depth to it as what it tries to present itself as having.
Yep.
But I think it's worth checking out. I mean, again, I don't know what this new series is going to be like. It just at this current point with what we know and the way the original series was, it really does feel like a weird decision. Well, okay, explainable. It is explainable in that, here's a well we can go back to, and there's a bunch of nostalgia. But I mean, creatively, it's a mystery as to why you would try to expand upon this.
Yep.
So, all right. So that is it for Fooly Cooly. So next time we are going to be talking about the Flintstones, and specifically the original series of the Flintstones, because there have been other iterations and weird spin-offs or child versions and live action movies and whatever the fuck. So it's going to be about the original series of the Flintstones.
Yeah, and we're not going to be talking about really any specific episodes. We might touch if we actually watch something, but it's more broad strokes. If you want to
overall,
if you want to get ready to actually think about this and have your own little mental viewpoint, I don't know, just find an episode of the Flintstones and watch it and be like, yeah, that was an episode of the Flintstones. I now have an opinion on the Flintstones.
Do they even still show that stuff on Boomerang anymore? I
don't know. Does Boomerang even show cartoons anymore?
They show cartoons. They just don't show a lot of the really, really old stuff like they used to. I mean, Boomerang used to be like, okay, we're starting to do a lot of original content here in Cartoon Network. Like, we're not going to be starting to cycle in like Flintstones episodes or the Toonheads thing or Warner Brothers things anymore. We're just going to shove that over to Boomerang. Now Boomerang, I think, is playing a lot of the original CN content, but a lot of it is still just not there, or they're not showing any of the really, really old stuff. As far as I remember, that has been the big change.
Flintstones? Apparently, yes, you can buy Flintstones on DVD. I don't know why you would, but
there's so much of it on YouTube anyway.
You could, for $25, you could own the complete first season of Flintstones across 4 discs.
Huh.
That's 737 minutes
of pure animation entertainment.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it's on YouTube anyway.
That's $30 a minute,
Wait, $30 a minute?
No, 30 minutes a dollar.
Yeah,
30 minutes a dollar. Yeah, 30 minutes a dollar.
Who the hell would pay $30 a minute for the Flintstones?
Man, that's some damn good Flintstones. You see,
what are they living in Japan?
Yeah, we made a new version of the Flintstones. There's only Fred Flintstone, and like Barney's like this diminutive friend, and he's got like three ladies that like around him, and they're like, they're not quite into him, but they're kind of into him. And it's like, instead of caveman times, it's instead like a Japanese high school, and they have like magical powers. It's not really like the Flintstones, but maybe their powers are dinosaur themed.
Or maybe the dinosaurs are just the girls now. So they'll have like a horn or a tail, but otherwise they're basically a human girl.
This is going to be my new light novel title. I can't believe my girlfriend's a dinosaur from 60 million years BC.
In a time that people and dinosaurs apparently coexisted in some form, which defies all science. This is all included in the title. Even the stuff I'm saying right now, that's all a part of the title.
You included this, my response to you, that yes, of course it's in the title. This entire thing's been in the title.
The entire novelty of this light novel is that it actually contains a dialogue as the title.
There's nothing actually in the book because the title keeps on going around the edge of the cover and into the book. You see, we're right now on like the dedications page. Hi, Mom. Anyways.
Imagine what they're going to have to abbreviate it to.
They abbreviate it to simply fuck. It's like, what
dinosaur fuck.
Dino fuck. Dino DNA.
Well, in terms of adaptations, I think at one point Seth MacFarlane was threatening to do a remake of Flintstones because I think he owns the rights to it now.
Why? Gotta get me that Flintstones. I want to own the Flintstones.
I don't know. It was something that was being floated around at one point, and I was like, "Oh God, why?"
That seems like a thing.
Who's asking for this?
That seems like the type of thing that Seth MacFarlane would be like, "Yeah, it's a great idea. I'm going to make the new Flintstones fart."
Well, to be fair, the Simpsons came from the Flintstones, and then Family Guy came from the Simpsons. I mean, it's all there. Mr. Postman is Mr. Zip. Wacky. We wouldn't have Chief Wiggum. It's, animation's all incestual.
I mean, I guess to a certain degree, he did get his start at Hanna-Barbera, so.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's explicable on some level. I just don't know who was asking for it.
Yep.
So, either way, next time we will be talking about the Flintstones. As always, you can reach us by email at addpodcast@gmail.com. You can reach either of us on Twitter. Mine is at RYMagnuson.
And I'm at SA Zorak.
You can always subscribe to us on iTunes, rate, review, tell your friends, do whatever the crap you want to do. It's a free podcast. Yeah, it's a podcast. Just keep doing what you're doing. So, we will see you guys next time.